1987. The movie industry. It was filled with police-related movies that really made a name for themselves. In video games, we are learning very quickly that Nintendo is making a name for themselves and that they're here to stay. And when it comes to music, I hope you're ready to experience something really bad. Let's take a look in 1987. Every year we make it through, more and more memories are locked into place in our minds. Certain video games or movies or even a simple chorus from a song you knew and loved can mean so much. Let's take a moment and talk about what makes each year from our past so special. On today's episode, the year is... Starting off with a movie that in my adulthood sent me furiously looking for the DVD, which I recently found, and that's the Chipmunk Adventure. The Chipmunk Adventure, in my opinion, is the greatest thing that we've ever gotten from Alvin and the Chipmunks. I used to watch the cartoon and I loved it a lot, but I have to say the Chipmunk Adventure was rewatched time and time again in my childhood home. The biggest standout for me in this movie is definitely a song called The Boys of Rock and Roll or The Girls of Rock and Roll. It's basically where the boys and the girls get together and they have an epic showdown of music with dance moves and words, just singing about the boys of rock and roll or the girls of rock and roll, and I adored this song to death. I actually, before I got myself a copy of the DVD of this movie, I searched up the song on YouTube and I would play it for my kids all the time. They could sing every word of this song because we love ourselves some Chipmunk Adventure and we love ourselves this song. The next thing is a movie that sticks with you once you've seen it, and I was definitely too young to see the movie when I did. That's Full Metal Jacket. I don't think my parents knew I was watching this movie when I did. Again, I feel like I definitely wasn't ready to see it. Before seeing any sort of like military or army movie before this, I feel like the movies I saw were a little more lighthearted, a little more goofy, almost like the episode of Family Matters where Waldo and Steve and Eddie go enlist themselves in the army or military, and it's kind of making fun and joking around with how drill sergeants are. But when you see this movie, it puts it into perspective in a different light, and this is the first time I ever saw this type of movie where I was like, wow, this is serious business. And there's a specific scene in this movie where there's a big quote that has become a quote to this day is what's your major malfunction, and what proceeds to take place after that I don't necessarily want to talk about because it's a very serious issue, but man, it'll stick with you. I would say if you have not seen the movie yet, see it with caution, especially if you have younger people with you. There's some things in that movie that might even kind of mess you up a little bit mentally. So Full Metal Jacket, definitely a huge standout though in 1987 regardless.
I am Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, your senior drill instructor. From now on, you will speak only when spoken to.
The next one is Robocop, which I always found interesting because when I was younger, I saw Star Wars movies at the time and I saw Robocop, and for some reason my brain always never understood, because I was a kid and things would kind of get meshed up with your wild imagination. I would think of Darth Vader without his mask on and then Robocop without his mask on, and they kind of always in my mind like played as the same person, to where I almost even made up like this imaginary crossover universe that they were kind of one and the same, Darth Vader and Robocop. I know it wasn't a thing, but that's what my childhood brain thought. My favorite scene from this movie has to be the scene where they're showing off the enforcement droid 209 to the boardroom, kind of pitching this new idea of armory or military or police officer kind of droid that's going to take over what humans can do. And needless to say, while they're doing this, things are seemingly going okay, but before you know it, things go very wrong very quickly. Also, this is kind of like where I feel like when people are like, watch out, robots are going to take over the world and things can go bad. This might have been one of those movies that kind of sparked that into our human brains, that might happen, because that scene got real dark, real quick, real bloody real quick. I was not expecting that, I'll tell you that much.
Very disappointed. I'm sure it's only a glitch. A temporary setback. You call this a glitch?
I've never been a huge fan of spoof movies, but I feel like there is one in the world that has kind of stuck out for everybody as like, this is the spoof movie that did it right, and that's SpaceBalls.
I can't breathe in this thing.
John Candy, Rick Moranis, and Mel Brooks did a fantastic job with this movie. I watched it just last night before filming this one more time to kind of refresh my brain with this, and what I really noticed is there was so many hidden references or funny little jokes, subtle jokes, everywhere placed out throughout the movie that my younger self might have caught but not really understood. Watching it again, I genuinely found myself laughing way more than I would have pictured myself laughing, especially as an adult. Sometimes you can rewatch these things and go, that was a little cheesier than I thought, but no, absolutely found myself cracking up the whole time. But I have to admit, seeing Pizza the Hut again, when I was a kid, I was like, man, that is funny, that is goofy, that is silly. But if you really look at Pizza the Hut up close and kind of stare at him, especially when the character sitting next to him starts biting on his face, I genuinely was a little disturbed. But SpaceBalls, fantastic, recommend watching it. Definitely watch a Star Wars movie or two if you haven't seen any Star Wars movies before this. Otherwise you might not get a lot of the humor. But SpaceBalls, fantastic 1987 movie.
Now you see that evil will always triumph, because good is dumb.
My mom, growing up, always thought one actor was the best looking actor in the world, and that was Mel Gibson. Danny Glover and Mel Gibson starred in the amazing buddy cop movies Lethal Weapon. I personally believe that the Lethal Weapon movies are the perfect defining buddy cop movies. Yes, there's a ton of other ones out there. Yes, there's a lot of really funny ones or even good serious ones, but I think Lethal Weapon did it perfectly. I remember watching this as a kid and my mom couldn't stop talking about Mel Gibson. This was always her guy, Mel Gibson this, Mel Gibson that, Mel Gibson this. And it's funny, as a kid I was like, Mom, he's just a normal looking dude, but gotta admit, watched it again recently, Mel Gibson and Lethal Weapon, good looking dude. I think Mel Gibson and Danny Glover did a fantastic job with their chemistry on set during this movie because there's so many scenes in there where you can genuinely feel them being buddies that actually care about each other. There are a lot of really good and interesting scenes in this movie, a lot of different ranges in the acting from goofy to silly to sad to dramatic to a little too realistic. There's even one which is kind of one of my favorites because it shows some really good acting chops in both of the characters, and this is where Danny Glover and Mel Gibson are face to face. Danny Glover and Mel Gibson kind of both assist Mel Gibson into putting a gun up to himself, like almost like, you talk a lot of talk, go ahead and pull the trigger. And you see Mel Gibson get really close to pulling the trigger, and Danny Glover basically looks at him and is like, you really are crazy. You have really lost it. But just the tension in that scene with both of their faces up close, it's almost like, it almost didn't even feel like acting. And as a younger person, and even now seeing that, it's a little kind of a scary scene to watch. It's like, oh my gosh, I genuinely felt that back then and now.
I'm hungry. I'm gonna go and get something to eat.
I've said it before and I'll say it again, but my favorite hockey game of all time came out in 1987 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that's Blades of Steel. It's always been a little hard for me to really fully enjoy sports games because I'm not a sports guy at all, so normally for me to enjoy sports games or sports-like games, it's always had to have been more like arcade style, really goofy, no rules, no actual official rules going on because I can kind of just be free and play around. Even though Blades of Steel played by the rules more, it just felt like a good hockey game. When I would play hockey games even after Blades of Steel, I always felt like the games were a little too floaty and fluid, and I know that makes sense because you glide on ice, you slide around, so it makes sense to transfer that into hockey. But Blades of Steel always just felt a little more harsh. We always loved the voice animations in that game. One of our favorites was "Get the puck," which we always referred to it as that's what they actually said in the game, but who knows looking forward if that's actually what was said. Also, you couldn't beat the fighting back then in that game. It was basic, it was simple, but my brothers and I would hoot and holler and yell and scream purposely, like I'm sure many of you, tried to get into fights on that game because once the fight started, that's where the real fun started for us. It's crazy to think that so many big staple video games started early on in the Nintendo Entertainment System. You know, we just talked about Mario in 1985, we talked about The Legend of Zelda soon after that, we talked about Metroid, but in 1987, we got Final Fantasy. The Final Fantasy games have always been locked down in my family household, and that's not necessarily me enjoying them, but my brothers, especially my brother Adam, was a huge Final Fantasy guy. This was like something that he always talked about, always tried to convince me to play, but I never really did. And it wasn't because I didn't like it, but it was one of those game series where you just enjoy watching it so much that you could just watch them play it all the time. And it's crazy to think that not really growing up playing any Final Fantasy games in my younger years, I still at any moment, if I heard a video game music trivia or anything like that, where I heard any sound effects or any music from Final Fantasy, my brain knew that's Final Fantasy within a second, just like that. Because again, my brother Adam, obsessed with Final Fantasy. When I first met Ricky, he was huge into Final Fantasy, and again, not really jumping in, would watch Ricky play Final Fantasy all the time. So Final Fantasy, starting here, 1987, Nintendo Entertainment System, absolutely huge, monumental thing in video games. Rocky on the Sega Master System, in my opinion, is by far the best looking boxing game we got during the whole 8-bit generation. Obviously, I was playing games like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out or Punch-Out, which are fantastic games. Also games like Ring King, which I also think is highly underappreciated. But the Sega Master System game, Rocky, had just such big, beautiful sprites, and I feel like really vibrant colors. Something that also stuck out in this game very much to me is the training sequences. You had to prep Rocky. It was just like the movies. It was just like Rocky 4, what you see with him with Drago. You see the epic fighting scenes, the training montages, and you're like, hey, in this game, you get those as well. I do like the music, I do like the visuals, I do like the way the gameplay works, and I have to say, I think the visuals might be the best of any 8-bit sprites when it comes to boxing games in the 8-bit generation. Again, another huge franchise, huge series born in 1987, and that's Mega Man. When it comes to the world of side-scrollers and platformers, I would bet that the majority of retro people would put a Mega Man game somewhere in their top 10. Mega Man was known for being brutally difficult, but Mega Man also gave us some other things that kind of became staple landmarks when it came to retro video games. One of the biggest ones is earning power-ups from bosses at the end of the levels. It became a synonymous thing within Mega Man games. You beat a boss, you then in return get his powers, and we have seen so many different iterations of Mega Man. Mega Man has made its way all the way up to Mega Man 11, but that's not to say that's all we got. As many of you know, Mega Man has seen so many different forms on different consoles and different type of styles, and even in fighting games and so many other things. It's crazy to think in 1987, again, another huge monumental video game birthed in this year. An interesting thing we got in the video game world in 1987 was the Nintendo Power Pad. This accessory was mostly used for a video game called World Class Track Meet. And if you don't know what it is, this was a giant pad that you would put on the floor with 12 pressure centers where you would play video games that kind of simulate anything athletic, whether it's running, jumping, hurdling, anything like that. And you would stand on these pressure points and you would run in place or jump in place or do push-ups in place or whatever it was. It was an interesting concept and many people used it the way it was supposed to be, but most people like myself would just lay down on the ground and punch them and just move faster that way. In retrospect, was it something we really used often in my household? No, not really. It was there, it was kind of silly, it was kind of interesting to say the least. Again, it wasn't much played in our house, but it was a novelty and definitely something that is synonymous with the Nintendo in the 80s.
You gotta run, jump, faster, higher. The Nintendo Power Pad puts you in total control. You are the game, you are the power. Now you're playing with power, body power. You get the Power Pad, Control Deck, Zapper, and 3 games only in Nintendo's exciting new Power Set.
We're starting off with Livin' on a Prayer by Jon Bon Jovi, which is a little bit interesting for me and a little weird when I think back on it. And the reason I say that is because growing up hearing this song, I loved this song. I thought I was so cool listening to this song. I thought I was tough. I thought I was edgy. I thought I was a rocker listening to this. As I got older, I have to be honest, I'm not really a Jon Bon Jovi fan anymore. Don't take this wrong because everyone has personal opinions, but for me personally, looking back on Jon Bon Jovi, now I find it a little cringy. I find it a little try-hard, but that's okay. There definitely are other Jon Bon Jovi songs that I do like. It's just this one in particular that it's an interesting one for me because I grew up thinking it was so cool. I thought I was so cool hearing it, but now when I hear it on the radio, I'm kind of like, this isn't really my jam anymore, and that's just me being honest. As I've mentioned before in these videos, I am a huge sucker for over-the-top romantic love songs, and my gosh, is there a better one than I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight by Cutting Crew. It's funny because when I was younger, I had a girlfriend in 6th grade, and I remember I was always in my room singing in the mirror, like singing my heart out that I was singing to her. Oh gosh, I can tell you guys later, which we'll talk about later with Boys II Men and other songs. But this song, I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight, I remember singing it out like there was no tomorrow, like I was hurting for love. And I was a little kid at the time, but this was such a staple. And again, hearing this song now, love the song, beautiful song. Some people mock it as a little cheesy, and I know I just made a reference to being cheesy in the last song, so that's okay if you don't like it, but I gotta admit, I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight. My first real experience with U2 and kind of falling in love with the band was with this song, With or Without You. When U2 first kind of came into my life, I was a little confused on what they exactly were, what type of band they were. I didn't know if they were like more of a slow driving band or a rock band because I kind of heard a little bit of both. But what I found is that U2 is very versatile when it comes to their music, but I definitely was a fan of their songs like With or Without You that's a little bit slower paced but has like a good driving force to it, good driving kick to it, good driving drums to it, and it made me really fall in love with that style of music. A lot of the clickety-clack delay pedal sounds that the U2 band really brings to us in a lot of their music. Since then, I've always continued to enjoy U2. I never was like overly in love with them, and I never kind of fell out of liking them. They've always been just right here as a band I really enjoy.
With or without you.
The song Bad is such a defining song for Michael Jackson. I know that Michael Jackson has obviously gone through a ton of iterations in his life, but I feel like Bad during this time was such a cool time for Michael Jackson. This is when he had a little bit more of that edge. This is when it was cool to walk out wearing the leather jacket, where kicking your feet to the side and kind of popping and locking, because that's what Michael Jackson did in the song Bad. This is who Michael Jackson was portraying himself as. I think during this time in 1987 when Bad was on the Billboard chart toppers, this was a really good time in Michael Jackson's music. I didn't discover Billy Idol until later on in my high school years, and one of the songs that I came to enjoy was Monet Monet. I gotta tell you, I know that music can take people back to a certain place in time, but Billy Idol and listening to Billy Idol is some of the most, I would say, vivid memories I have. And I'm talking because a lot of these songs, when you hear them, you know, nostalgic songs, you hear them and you're like, oh, I remember I was here, I remember I was doing that with this person, doing this with that person. But this song, I remember exactly the car we were in. I remember the beach we were driving by. I remember the people I was in the car with. I remember what it looked like looking over, talking to them with their hair flowing in the wind and everyone laughing and having a good time. Billy Idol was kind of like our hype music for certain times. During this time in my high school life, when we would go surfing, getting hyped up to go bodyboarding. I was in bodyboarding competitions actually in high school. Many people might not know that when I was on surf team. And man, Billy Idol and Van Halen as well. But we would hype ourselves up with a lot of Billy Idol music, getting ourselves ready to go out there, have a good time, and hopefully stomp some other schools and win those titles. That was a little look at some of my favorite things from 1987. Let me know what you guys loved from that year. Was it music the most? Was it movies the most? Or was it video games the most? All right, up next, 1988. Let's see what's going down in 1988. Leave me some comments down below of what you enjoyed or you think I might have enjoyed from 1988. All right, you guys have a good one. I'll see you next time.